Okay, I have 5:30, so welcome for those of you here, and also welcome to those who are at home watching the live stream of this. Tonight is designed for questions and answers, nothing else, just questions. We'll provide the answers. If we're not able to answer your question, we can get that to you at a later time. We also plan to post the questions with answers on our website in the next couple of days. So the only thing we ask is wait until you get a microphone to ask your questions so those who are at home watching the live stream can hear the question before Kevin answers the question, okay?
All right, so I'm Kevin Holm. I'm with LHB. We're the lead consultant as far as the group that's working with the task force and the school board to develop the plan. I have a slideshow that has a number of slides. A lot of them are slides that we've shown at the different presentations, so I can go back and reference them, and or they're slides that have some new information. So if you have a question about a specific slide or a specific item, hopefully I have the slide that I can go to. I will apologize right now. I am kind of trying to get over a cold, so if I cough, sneeze, or have to take a second, I apologize. So with that, I guess if somebody wants to be the brave one to take the first question, that'd be great.
I'm also getting over a cold, so I understand. So on one of the slides, I remember seeing that there was I believe some sort of anticipated number of students based on housing developments. And I remember seeing it was about 87 or something for the Falwell area, 0 for Bamber. That seemed maybe a little bit off because there's a lot of growth in that Bamber Valley area. So I don't know if we've looked at that again or.
So that slide is specifically on the multifamily housing increase.
Okay.
So when we look at, I think it's this slide right here that you're looking at. So each one of, you can see the blue are the blue dots. Those are where the 4,500 planned units are. They're either under construction or planned to, or have had some conversation with the city or the county. And so each one of those represents a certain number of units over 5. So whether it's 50 or 150 or whatever. And so this is the different housing types. So there's almost 4,200 market rate housing units and about 352 units that are below market rate. And then this is the student yield from that. So what that shows is it just shows that there's no multifamily developments that are planned for the Bamber Valley area right now.
Okay. So are we looking at other type of growth then too?
Yep, so the other growth would be when we start to look at a slide like this, and it shows that there was over 400 homes built in the Bamber Valley range from 2013 to 2017.
Yeah. All right, very good, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, and the second one is 2-part. So the first one is, when you're looking at your population projections for Rochester Public School students, are you using the city and DMC projection numbers?
So we are not using those specific numbers. We have referenced them and looked back at them. What we've tried to do is make sure that we're not dramatically different from them, but we've been basing our projections based on the housing growth that we've seen and kind of feedback from the task force that we've been dealing with locally here as to that feedback, and even some of the feedback that we got from the last citizen voice, where we had the input question about are we being overly conservative or underly conservative, and it looked like it was just slightly from the group that was there, 7,500 people, that they felt we were being slightly conservative or below what they thought it would happen.
And, so, and just a quick follow-up to that. So you are being conservative, and I'm curious to know why you think that's a good projection number.
So when we talk about where this is going, the 4,500 units of multifamily that we just talked about, we're planning 3,500 of those to actually get built in the next 5 years. This yellow shows what that graph is. So although we feel it's being conservative because we're only assuming 3,500 of the 4,500, you can see that that's dramatically more than the last 5 years. So we're kind of cutting that line and doing our best judgment on where we think this is going to fall. And then the other piece is when you look at the the single family, which are the blue pieces of this graph, you can see that we're pretty much tracking with what's happened over the last 5 years. And so the other piece that we're doing is, so we're looking at what I would call our best guess at the next 5 years. Beyond that, the task force and the board has agreed that when we talk about what our direction should be for where we should be, build to a 5-year enrollment projection at 90%. So we're saying that 5 years out, after all those kids are in, we still want the buildings to only be at 90% versus the 98% that they're at, so that we have that growth and that buffer. We don't want to get too aggressive with the projections and overbuild, because then the district is carrying the load of owning and operating more buildings than they need. At the same point, we don't want to be sitting here in 5 years saying, well, we're over capacity again and we need to build another X elementary schools.
Okay, thanks. My second question is related to the general overall goals and objections and some specific concrete examples. So are you using research on student-centric learning gains to put in your facilities development plan? And can you articulate those if you are?
So how a referendum works or how it sits, we won't design, or whoever is selected won't design the buildings until after the referendum passes. Once the referendum passes, then the building designs happen. And so when we're talking about the different educational roles and models, what we're looking at is what's currently the district's class size that they've passed in the past, which is 20 students at the kindergarten level, 24 first and second, 29 third, fourth, second, third, and then 31 fourth, fifth. So those are the maximum class sizes that have been approved by the board. What we do have in our building programs, we created mock programs of these facilities. Those programs do actually show both large group spaces and small group spaces, so you have the flexibility in this building to evolve and change with educational models as they evolve and change. We know that they've changed quite a bit over the past 20 years, and we know that they're going to continue to change. There's a lot more change at the high school level than the elementary level, but we're still seeing that change and that student-centered approach in the educational needs and expectations. So whether it's a gifted and talented student or a student that requires assistance in mathematics or reading, we have those types of spaces and that ability for the district to do that based on the building sizes and the programmatic spaces and the dollars set aside. But the design won't happen until the referendum passes.
This is a comment more than a question, and then I will yield the mic. But the research that I did about student learning gains for math and reading said that smaller schools are indeed better for student learning gains, and big schools are particularly disadvantage minority and underserved audiences. So it really worries me that we are asking for money for a small number of large schools, because then we limit our ability to have those smaller schools. And I'd also like to say the research said that lots of communities do this because it's cheaper, but it doesn't yield out in the research to be cheaper. And I worry that we're not looking at operational costs and capital costs together when we look at the long-term life of a school. And so it just really concerns me that RPS is putting together a facilities options that are not going to be in the best interest of this community, our workforce development, and our students moving forward. And that is, in my opinion, not going to be helpful for Rochester as we move forward.
Follow-up question for clarity. So just looking at, and maybe we could show it to you. I don't think it was actually a slide that we had printed off that was referencing multifamily homes like you were talking about. It says K through 5 student potential from housing development.
And again, that is strictly the multifamily. So
only that. So then what are we looking at for total then?
That's where we go to that slide that was showing in the past 5 years, there was about 400 homes specific to Bamber Valley School District.
But then how many? Yeah.
Oh, that one. Yep. So I do have that slide. So, and that is specifically just the multifamily that's included in that one. Might be quicker if I take a couple steps. So the slides that they're talking about are these slides here. And so in each case, that K5 potential, which is this column right here, is literally just the numbers from that multifamily that's been brought over. It does not include any of the single family. And that's because right now in Rochester, there's only 2 developments that have any size of single family. And even then, it's not enough units to make a dramatic difference. So it's more looking at the past historical of what's happened and where that's going as far as growth.
So there's no way to anticipate the single-family
Well,
growth?
the way to anticipate it is to look at that other graph that I showed, which was the last 5 years, from 2013 to 2017, the number of single-family homes that were in there. And then that ties into the student yield of how long before a home of a certain value yields a student and how many students it yields, which is that whole housing anticipation piece. So in theory, the number of All right, so I don't have the slide that makes up the student yield, but the way the housing study was done is it takes a look at every one of the single-family homes in the Rochester School District, puts them in an age group and a price category. And then by that age group and that price category, they can assume about how many children, or it's 0.37, for instance, for a single-family home overall. And then within the age groups and the price ranges, you can imagine that would vary. So we do have that level and ability to go into that approach. But at this point, understanding where the growth has been and about how many units we're looking at for the next 5 years, it's pretty level as far as what we've done on capacities. And so when you look at that sheet that's in front of you, we do show that capacity at the 87% or whatever below the single-family additions.
So if I'm understanding you right, it's hard to judge the single-family numbers going forward, or how that's impacting our growth, or?
It is tougher to do it because there's no large developments. If you look at, for instance, the Hugo area out just north of the cities, a few years ago, prior to 2008, when they grew, there was 2,700 housing units planned up there, single family, multifamily, all that type of deal. So to do a growth projection based on that was very simple. With your district, what we know is where the concentration zones are, which is the northwest, the southeast, and the southwest. And we know that there's going to be about 300 homes a year split between those areas, with a sprinkling kind of in the center and to the northeast.
Okay.
Is that?
I think that answers the question.
One of the slides that I viewed was current operational costs. Can you explain what goes into that calculation? For example, age of the building and salaries of the more experienced or tenured teachers?
So the way we did that slide was we looked at a couple different models of doing it based on how we thought it would be run, and then we decided to look at it from just how the buildings are actually being run within the district itself. Is this the slide that you're referring to?
Yes. Yep.
So the dollar values here are the actual 2017 operational costs minus food service and minus long-term facility maintenance. And the reason we subtracted those two things out is because they can make a pretty dramatic impact. If food service bought a couple extra pieces of equipment, that might be an extra $20, $30, $50, $100,000. If they had a long-term facility maintenance upgrade, that might be $2 to $5 million that was added to that budget, which would have skewed the numbers. So we took those values up a couple rows from the grand total at the bottom of the sheet.
Okay. So are teachers' salaries included?
Yes, that is all the teachers' salaries. It's the number of paras they have. It's the number of professional staff. It's the number of custodial staff. It's the entire makeup that was attributed with that budget or that building number when they did their financials.
So a school who has higher staff retention would have higher salaries and higher operational costs?
To some degree. But what we did here also is we looked at it, we separated the building types as well. So none of the facilities that you see up here are Title I facilities. Title I facilities would be the facilities that get additional dollars, state funding or federal funding to deal with disadvantaged students, meaning students that are in that poverty level or that lower level. So and the reason we have to separate that out is because, again, that's additional dollars for teachers and staff in those spaces. So this is strictly the closest thing we could come to an apples-to-apples comparison of buildings relative to size and organization.
Okay. And are older buildings, do they have more maintenance costs included in the operational
That's why we
cost?
pulled that LTFM out. So the only thing that's reflected in here on your older buildings is the actual utility costs, because generally they're lagging a little bit and they have very little to no insulation in the walls and some of those things. So they would have slightly larger operational costs from that aspect. But again, utilities are a fraction of staff salaries.
Yep. So, for example, Falwell had a major flooding problem. They had to do a lot of construction work. Would that be part of operational costs
That's
here?
below the line that we looked at here.
Okay, so it's not included?
Nope.
That's helpful, thank you.
Yep. Other questions?
I'd like to get a better understanding of what the process is going forward. I understand this kind of information gathering leads to a survey, which then leads to a referendum. My question is, after we as a community get survey results and we see one way or the other, what's the result, positive or negative? And then if we get to the referendum, what would the result be? Positive or negative, up or down vote on what we decide?
You bet. So I'll try and start with the overall timeline first, and then we'll backplate into what happens at each one of those phases. So I'll start, oddly enough, I'll start in the middle of the timeline. 2019 is the referendum date, in theory, November of 2019, assuming that the board chooses to proceed forward with it. And the reason I'm starting in the middle is because up to 2019 will be a fair amount of education to the public about what the referendum is and how it's there. Prior to doing that is what we're looking at for the next couple months. So right now, as part of these citizen voice question and answer sessions and the previous meetings, the task force, the board pushing back and asking questions of us, is trying to define what is the right path for Rochester Public Schools to bring forward in the survey. So that survey, we're going to look at the first draft of that survey tomorrow with the task force, and then 2 weeks after tomorrow, I believe is when we meet with the school board to look at the survey questions. If they approve the survey to go forward, it will then be mailed out. Survey results should be back sometime in February, and then we'll have a report to task force and school board again.
That survey goes out to everyone in Rochester,
Yep,
right?
yep. More than just Rochester, the school district boundaries. So the information in that survey.
Is that true? Does it go out to everybody, or is it representative sample?
Right now, we're looking at it going out to everybody. The consultant has told us that it doesn't need to go out to everybody, but right now we've said that it would go out to everybody. So it's a little bit up in the air, but the intent is that it would go out to everybody right now. And if you do have 2 voters in the household, you can call in and request a second number so that both mom and dad, or mom, dad, and child can all fill out the survey if so inclined. So there is the opportunity for each eligible voter to participate in it. The other piece to that,
The only option then will be a paper survey, there won't be an online option.
you have, so when the paper survey is emailed to you, or is mailed to you, you then have the ability to fill out the paper and return it, and or do the online section of it. And then for multiple languages, you have the ability to request that and or to do a phone survey to take that information. So there's multiple ways for that survey to occur. So then after the survey information has been given to the board, that's when the board will make a final decision as to whether or not they're going to move forward with the referendum, and if so, what they're going to include in there based on the likelihood of passing. If they get feedback from the consultant saying it's highly unlikely that something's going to pass, it's best case scenario, we don't put that then in the referendum. So now fast forward to the referendum, November of 2019. If the referendum does pass, the district then will go out and solicit both for architects, engineers, as well likely as whether or not they do a construction management method or some other methodology to help them manage the number of projects that they have. So they'll go out and solicit those team members, and the design will then start. So design will take roughly a year for all of these projects to occur, and then bidding would happen late 2020, early 2021 for a spring 2021 start. And then we've been looking at it. We believe all of the projects could be completed in a 15-month to 17-month period, with the hopes that we would be open for school in all of the facilities by fall of 2022. The caveat to that is Longfellow is a pretty restricted site location. If that piece does move forward, we might want to build the middle school first, move the kids out of Longfellow into another facility as a short-term, one-year type deal, and then build Longfellow. So we've looked at different options of, if we have to move kids, is there a way to do this, and what are the impacts to it? But the overall intent is to let the kids continue to go to the buildings that they're at until the construction is done, and then move the kids into the new facilities. Does that give you enough detail?
I think that covers, sorry. I think that covers I think that covers referendum passing scenario. I want to know a little bit more about referendum not passing or survey not passing.
So the district has options if it doesn't pass. In Minnesota, you're still allowed to turn around and go out again in the spring in the hopes that you would get a pass. If that doesn't work, then you have the reality of continue to be overpopulated in your facilities, which isn't good for the students or the staff, and then they have to look at other methodologies to increase capacities.
Yeah, just maybe I can help a little bit. For example, back in 2015 when we did an operating referendum, we did 2 surveys. The first survey we put out, I think, 3 different amounts, and then we also had a question, would you support an additional cost for technology? The survey results came back and said, no, we wouldn't support technology. So that told the board that needs to go off the table. We're not even going to pursue that any further. So then we did another survey and kind of honed in on the amount to see where we were. So very similar to what we're doing here is, which is a couple weeks when we present this to the board, there'll be, here's the amount we're going to ask for. Here's what you get for that. Then there'll be another question, say, well, what if we did this? Would you support this at this cost? How about if we built a pool at Century at this cost? Would you support this? So there's multiple questions. So from that data, the board's going to have to decide, one, will the voters support the pool and all the other additional questions? If the support says no, then I assume we'll take that off the table and just look at what's the amount that the taxpayers will support, and that will determine what the final referendum will be. So the survey is really to get feedback on how much support is there for X amount of dollars, and then is there additional support for other items that we've been sharing over the months on additional facility needs. Is there enough support to put those on the question as well? If it doesn't pass, like Kevin said, we'll take that survey feedback and make adjustments and go out again, because we can't just go on for the next 5 years under the current situation that we're in. So we'd have to probably scale back and then try it again at a later date.
Can you comment on what that adjustment process might look like? What that adjustment, like you said, if it fails, what's the process to adjust?
It just depends what we hear. For example, when we did the operating, I don't remember the percentage, but there was a real small percentage from the survey that the technology, so what that told us is there's not enough support, so let's don't even go after it. So it went off. And then I think based on the first survey, we were able to narrow I think we put 3 different price ranges out there. We were able to narrow that down on the second survey. And then once we got the results from the second survey, they were able to land on an exact dollar amount that they wanted to ask for.
Do we know what's going on the survey?
Wait for the mic here real quick.
Sorry. Do we know what's going on the survey yet? Like what option we talked about multiple times? Okay.
Yep. So this is the base question that is being looked at right now with the survey folks. So it's a new elementary school on the existing Northwest property. It's reconstructing Bishop to be 720, reconstructing Longfellow to 720, and then the new middle school for 1,200, and then safety and security is the secure entries at the buildings that don't currently have them.
So this option doesn't include, it's just the property for the potential of a new high school, or not?
So that's a separate question, actually. So what we're looking at is the property for the middle school because we need to build the middle school now. The high schools are currently at about 94% capacity, I think is what our studies show. And high schools, you can overdrive a little bit. So we're not recommending a high school at this point, but a new high school in 5 to 10 years, depending on what your growth model actually happens. That's going to drive when that high school is. If it's 5 years, 7, 10, 15, we don't know that yet.
2-part question. Is it too late to add questions to the survey? And specifically, I'm hoping for an aspirational option that includes optimal classroom sizes for student learning gains of 17 to 24.
So the operation.
I'm not done.
Well, but I got to answer your questions because you're talking about optimal classroom sizes. That is an operational cost, not a referendum cost. So that piece would have to go in front of the board, and that would drive up your operational costs, whether you add buildings or not. Your operational costs would go up as you reduce the number of staff per students.
So you're going to have to build facilities, and I'm hoping for an aspirational choice that includes elementary school classroom sizes of 17 to 24, plus the research says best learning gains for math and reading for elementary school is less than 400 students per building, and for high school, 600 to 900. And so is it too late to add an aspirational, research-based, student-centric option to the survey that will go out to the community? That's the first question.
Okay. So the answer to that is it too late to do that? No, because what we're planning on, you could have those lower class sizes for a year or two while you went out and did research and found out if you could do an operating referendum to support more staff, and then you would then build more buildings for the additional staff. So what we're proposing now is a bare minimum to get you through based on the number of students you have and the class sizes you have. You can add buildings and add operational costs at any point in time in the future.
And then the second question is this going out to all RPS community members or all community members? Because all community members presumably will be assessed and it will impact the whole community ultimately.
It'll go out to if it's sent out to every household, it'll be every household within the RPS school district. So it's outside of the city of Rochester. It includes the townships and others. I think right in front of you, Jason.
Thank you. I just wanted to build on what you had just said. There are some citizens who would be willing to support a referendum if smaller schools was part of it. So would it be possible to do it with the first survey rather than after a yes or no on the referendum? So
again, I think this is where we're trying to balance the rope here, right? Some citizens will support smaller schools, others won't. At
Exactly.
a bare minimum, the district needs to increase its capacity for where it's at right now. So what the conversation that you two are talking about would take a year, 2 years, 3 years to research what those costs would be on an operational standpoint, and you'd want to pass the operational before you pass the physical, because once you start building facilities, it costs a lot to get rid of them, or it costs a lot to operate them until they fill up. So my opinion or expectation on that would be, if that's something that's critical that should happen independent of this, and then that would follow up with another referendum in the future that would support a different structure to a district. But remember, there's 18,000 students in this district, and we need to make sure we're looking at all of them instead of just trying to take care of a small portion. And so we need to make sure we go in with something that's as safe as possible at this point, and then modifications can happen from there.
What if the referendum doesn't pass and there's a possibility it would have passed if it was funding for optimal education?
Part of that information, I think, will come in the survey information of what the tax burden or the tax impact is that people are willing to accept. I don't know if they're going to accept the full amount that's there right now, but I highly doubt that they would allow a value that's 2 or 3 times this amount, but I could be wrong.
I think we should ask. You'll never know if you don't ask.
Well, we'll know from the survey questions that are coming back here shortly.
Okay, we do know that about 80% of the voters do not have kids in our school system. And so that has to factor in too. So what we want to do is, how much can we push it to get passed? And yeah, in a perfect world where I could pass the $300 million referendum, we'd probably talk about what you're talking about. But the reality, the largest one this district's ever passed is 31 million. So even to go where we're at now is quite a stretch in my opinion. But I do believe that based on the data that we have and the work that we'll do, I think we can convince the voters to support something like this. I don't know if we could support a number larger than that. But this is a question and answer session. So if you really want to push smaller schools, I encourage you to come to a public board meeting, and during public comment, you can ultimately talk to the final decision makers on what you believe should happen.
I came in late, so I apologize if this question was already asked. But the housing and projection data, I'm wondering if the Olmsted County Planning Department or Rochester Planning Department was ever consulted, because I know that they did a lot of work around DMC and the comprehensive plan. So just wondering if that data or how that was like played into the projections. So that's the question I have about that, and then I have another one.
So the multifamily piece is where the 4,500 units of planned development came from. That came from the city and the county approach. So that's what drove that number. And then we adjusted it based on what we heard both locally from folks and regionally on the input.
That's great. And then I'm just wondering, I know that the survey is nearing completion. I'm wondering if anyone has survey design experience on the task force, or how that's being designed. And then maybe this is just a couple process suggestions, but I'm wondering if we can get a list of who participates on the task force. I know that the district has a nice website, like with all of the notes to meetings like this, but I can't see who is actually participating on the task force, and I think that would be really helpful. And then I'm wondering if there's going to be over-sampling of any marginalized communities or listening sessions or anything like that, because the meetings that I've attended so far related to this have had a majority of people that look like me that are white.
So the question that you asked about the people doing the survey. So School Perceptions is the group that's putting the survey together. So this is the group of 4 firms that were put together to try and help this process. Cooperative Strategies did the housing study. CRW, represented by Jason here today, they are the local architectural firm that understands the district facilities and those types of things. And then I'm with LHB, who has worked with the district over the years and understands a little as well. So, and then as far as the task force folks, we do have a few of them here today. I don't know if, can you guys all raise your hands if you're on the task force? So we've had a core group of, I'd say about 15 that have made it pretty regularly, but with busy schedules and 2-hour meetings plus and information review, it's been a little bit of hit and miss on people making it consistently, but the folks that you see today have been there almost religiously. So we've had a real good turnout, actually, one of the best groups I've worked with.
So I want to thank you for putting all this information together. This is my fourth one, I think. So this is just great. You did a great job. My real shock to me was, how did we get in this situation? We should have saw this coming, I feel, a while ago. And I know we can't go back in the past, but I'm just wondering, if we build these new schools, what is our new projection? Like, what's going to be, I'm going to be in this town for another 30 years, right? So, I mean, what's going to happen in 2040, 2045? Are we starting to look at that now versus when our schools got to 95, 96, and then it's like, uh-oh, we gotta build a new school, like, right now. So are we...
So the district has done a number of things to deal with capacity. Some of it has dealt with the changes in education, and some of it has just dealt with the realization that they need more space. So they've been incrementally increasing it. And so referendums are difficult to pass. So it takes a fair amount of planning. So the fact that it's going through at this point isn't too different from any other communities. But for instance, even just the project that just completed this fall, the early childhood at Hoover, that actually opened up space at a couple other buildings, as well as increased the capacity at Hoover and Churchill for more K-5 students to be in those facilities. And they made a number of kindergarten additions in years past to deal with the change for all-day kindergarten, those types of things. So they have been incrementally making improvements, and of course they've been continuing to upkeep their buildings. So there's been a number of things that have happened, but they've all happened at a smaller scale, kind of to propel the district forward and deal with the change as it was going. So, and of course this won't be the last referendum. You will be looking at a high school at some point in the next 5 to 15 years, based on your student growth, and who knows with education as it changes and online, high schools are going to be the most flexible. So maybe you'll be able to overdrive those buildings a little bit more and go to different options. But
so just specifically, do you think we'll need another middle school in 15 years if we build this one?
15 years is a long ways out. We're building capacity of an extra 600 and some from when you start, from 2022, if we grade advance forward. So in theory, you've got a few years of growth and ability to deal with the students that you have. Yep.
What's the basis for having the referendum in 2019 instead of 2020, and what do you foresee as the participation?
So the reason for 2019 versus 2020, the real question was, should it be spring of 19 or fall of 19? And it got pushed to fall of 19 because spring of 19, people just didn't feel that we'd have enough time to complete the study and get the community behind it. So it got pushed back to fall of 19. And the biggest reason 19 versus 20 is it's another year. It's another year of growth. It's another year of the overcapacity that staff and students are dealing with in the existing facilities. So the sooner the better. And heaven forbid that the referendum fails, and you gotta live with your capacity issue until something else happens. So the goal was to get it done as soon as it seemed like it could be completed and successful.
Were there discussions around participation? Were there discussions around participation between 19 versus 20, since 20 is an election year?
That conversation didn't come up on when it was. Like I said, the original conversation was April of 19 or November of 19, because we have the issue now and it's going to get worse based on the number of students that are coming into the housing projections. You got one back there. She hasn't had a chance yet. We'll get to you next, sir. Sorry.
Water, doing good.
I'm all right.
I have, I guess, a two-part question. First is, does the district still own the properties that would work for elementary school? I believe there was one in northwest, northeast, and southeast. And then my second part is, what is the rationale for not using those and building on existing sites? I'm particularly concerned about Bishop. I live in the neighborhood, and there are really only a couple of ways in and out of that neighborhood, and if we have such a large elementary, I'm worried about the expanding traffic.
Yep. So the answer to your question, the district owns 3 pieces of property that are large enough for a new structure or site. The one is being used in the northwest, And it's north of 55th, Jason? Or right around that 55th and West Circle Drive. That is a joint-owned piece of property with the city and the school district. It's about 17 acres. And so that is one piece of property that's currently being used. The other two, one's, I'll call it the northeast, and I call the other one just east, but I guess it's technically southeast. But it's still north of 14, I think. So that one starts to get there, but when we look at the way we've designed this, we're trying to maximize student walkability and reduce operating costs. So just adding more buildings doesn't necessarily solve some of the other operational problems that are happening. And you know, we talked early on about the size of buildings, and you know, there are school districts out there that are doing 1,200 student elementary schools, and this district decided that's too large. We understand that we can't survive at 360, and so we fell into the line of 720 as a 4-section building, which works very well from an educational standpoint, and it keeps it to the ability to control and know the students that are within the facility. So.
I'd like to get a little bit more information about referendum history, if I could. I haven't been in the community that long, and I understand every referendum, whether it's operational, facilities, whatever, is unique. But I just want to get a feeling, Dr. Munoz, you mentioned the largest we passed was it 31? 31 million? I was just wondering what the smallest that has failed has been, or just any history on, you know, Rochester's success rate in passing these.
I apologize, I don't have all the history. Our history guy is not here today, he's sick. My understanding, Century was the last one, the 31 million, but it took 3 tries to get that one passed, and they had to scale down the cost to get it to pass. Beyond that, I can't tell you what's the one we did prior to that. Maybe Dan, I don't know if you remember, prior to the one we did prior to Century.
Mike,
Riverside.
We got Heather right there.
Okay, and I have to get my glasses. Yeah. All right, so we have been 3 for 3 on the last 3 straight construction. We passed 65% to 35% in 1996 to construct, that was Century. We passed 80% to 20% in 2000 to construct the elementary school that replaced Hawthorne and Holmes. I'm assuming that's Riverside.
You know how much that those were?
The amount, no, I don't know. I just know that the Century was what they told me it was the largest that we passed. Okay. And then, let's see here. Prior to that, it was a little messy trying to get Century built, as well as the 4th middle school. Withdrawn and conducted. So it looks like it failed in 1993 and failed in 1994 to buy a portion of RCTC to convert to a 3rd high school. So it took 3 tries to get Century passed. And because I know original design was a pool, and that got reduced, and then there's not concession stands and restrooms at the football field because that got taken off based on the feedback. They just kept scaling it down to get to a number that people would support.
Now the pool came back, right?
Yes.
Thank you. So did I hear the last one that was Riverside passed 80% to 20% in 1996? Is that correct?
It was 80 to 20 in 2000.
And 80 to 20 in 2000, okay. So I think we live in a community that has changed a lot in the last 20 years, and we also have been trained to expect growth and to have very high expectations. We've been trained that by the DMC proposals and the expectations that we live in one of the best communities in the country. And I'm just wondering, along with that, and it seems that for the last two, though it's been 20 years, there has been good support, though it took 3 times for Century to go through. I'm just wondering, commensurate with that, does the district have a long-term plan, knowing that we're expecting this DMC growth and that we're expecting this, community that we're trying to attract people to? How is the district planning to accommodate that? Is there a longer range, to use the word that's been tossed about tonight, aspirational vision for the district as well?
So I'll start to answer that, and then, so the district has 2 different, well, they have multiple things going on right now, but they're working on their strategic plan, which is the educational base and their approach to students. At the same time, we're doing this, which is the facility planning piece. And so when we talk about this type of property guidelines, we're actually looking forward as to what should they be looking at and how should they be choosing it. Again, we need to balance what the current population will vote for and move forward with. So there's absolutely no discussion about getting rid of the 2 properties over here that would work for elementary sites, because at some point those will be needed. So those aren't being talked about as being sold like they might be in other communities that don't see a growth, where they would sell off properties to help offset the costs. This northwest property up here is the piece that we are going to use right now for the elementary school, the Northwest Elementary School, if it happens. And then we're looking down in the southwest because there's no properties owned down there right now. So this is looking at, if you just did a real generic outlay of the walking boundary or the walking radius of a building, how that might look. And this is the elementary buildings. So you have a number of elementary buildings already that have overlapping walk zones or different things like that. So this was just a real simplified approach to what it would look like if you started to cover the entire district. That was for the elementaries. This is the middle school piece. And so now with the middle school, we know that we have 3 middle schools right now. The 4th one being in the center is drawing a blank, I am sick. So the yellow space is saying ideally a middle school in that location somewhere would work out well. When we look at the high school and we look at a quadrant type approach, a high school in the southwest might make sense as well. And of course, there's elementaries that are showing down there as well for that growth potential that's happening. So right now, as part of this project, there would be a middle school in that southwest quadrant somewhere. It would have enough property for the middle school, but one of the survey questions is, do we buy enough property so that we can co-locate an elementary school and a high school at that site as well? So the base version would be about a 40-acre site for the middle school. And if we bought enough property to have 3 different types of buildings there, then we'd be looking at about 100 to 120 acres in that southwest corner somewhere. So there is some future growth planned or being looked at as far as additional buildings and properties. But at this point, the key point is to make sure that we don't lose any of the large properties for buildings in the growth areas as well, at the same time that we're looking forward to what we can do. Other questions?
Back to the survey, will that include some questions about the boundary changes?
Right now, we do not have any boundary changes questions in there, and that's primarily for 2 reasons. One, growth is a difficult thing to project. And if there's a significant change or a differential, or you get a major housing developer that comes in and wants to hit a certain part of the community, then that's going to change or morph, and it will solve or satisfy that housing need, but in one quadrant versus overall. So we're not talking about boundary changes. The district just passed a boundary change for fall of 2019. The hopes is that that'll take us all the way through to 2020, but again, depending on what happens between now and then and the capacity variations of the buildings, that could possibly change, but at a minimum in 2022, if the referendum is successful, there will be a boundary change that'll be based on the current student counts.
So just to follow up, the boundary changes that were part of this proposal are still fluid, in other
That was
words?
strictly for us to define where was the right location to put the buildings and make the improvements based on where the growth is and how it was impacting the buildings and that type of thing. So it was a fit model to make sure that we were going in the right locations.
So I know that these were just ideas, but walkability was one of the goals of the task force. And I know at one of the previous meetings, there was a comment made that 52 was like uncrossable and that Falwell was only accessible on two sides. And I think you've heard from several people that I've explained to you that that's not the case. I guess I'm concerned that that's still part of our thought process. Have we corrected that misperception?
We haven't defined any actual boundaries, so we've looked at the options of if Second Street remains a walk border or a walk boundary, then where would those kids go? And then they could actually go into some of the other buildings, and then it could flow to the west. But again, that's speculation until we know. There's a couple of housing developments that actually fall into the Falwell section, which may continue to restrict and reduce the size of that zone just based on the number of students in that area.
Yeah.
So that's what you're seeing at some of the sites. It's just a restriction of that walk boundary to deal with the overcapacity issues that you have.
Yeah, no, I get there's several factors at play.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to correct that one misperception that was out there.
Right.
And maybe a follow-up question. It seems like we're talking about the survey questions. It seems like we're talking about money and monetary value. And perhaps it would be helpful to have some sort of value piece to the question or to these survey questions. And I know it's a tough one to nail down, but I think what I've not really heard a whole lot of is student achievement. How can we do a good job with student achievement? And is there a value at these different size of buildings? I mean, I don't know what the right answer is, but it seems like we're focusing on dollars, construction, but how are we doing a better service for our students?
You bet. And we did hear that as we were going through the process, and so we kind of added a few slides that looked at the improvements by the replacement of some of the buildings, and I don't remember what order I had that in. I think it's out here. So here's where we talk about the attributes of a 720 and the valuation of a addition versus remodel. And so these slides have been adjusted to literally hit some of those key points about educational value within the space, educational adequacy of the buildings and of the spaces. And when we talk about the square footage of the buildings and the cost per square foot, that relates back to that educational adequacy and having the large group spaces and the small group spaces, natural daylight, great air ventilation or great air quality type scenarios. So those are all the pieces that are going into the structures that are there, and the district has been making incremental improvements on the buildings that they have as well. So
I think my question is more about less, the details of the structure and the facilities, but more on outcomes and student outcomes.
And that's the strategic plan part that the
Okay.
district is working on independently. Well, not independently, it's a base value of what we're looking at, trying to support with the physical plan that we're doing right now.
Would that be helpful to be part of the survey questions, is to have something of value?
That has a lot of information and a lot of community feedback and input into it. And so I think to try and include that might detract from the question at hand. You're right. For people like yourselves that are looking at it holistically, it would definitely help you make a more informed decision. I believe is it up on the website, the strategic plan? Not yet? Oh, yeah. Oh, it is. It is. Okay. So I guess I would encourage people to go take a look at that and what that's looking at as far as student achievement and student development over their pre-K through 12 scenario.
Okay. So it's maybe a simplistic example, but if I'm going to buy a vacuum cleaner, I'm not going to go just for the cheapest one. I'd like to know how well does it function, how long, is there anything of that sort of nature when we're talking about student achievement? So, thanks.
There's about 5 minutes left, so we'll take a couple more questions. Thank you very much. This is very well researched, and change is inevitable. Question on the timeline with the referendums and things of that nature. Boundary changes were brought up. At what point in the approximate timeline that you gave is it optimal to provide input on boundary changes?
The boundary changes that'll occur if the referendum's successful, that'll probably happen if it's anything like what the district just did. They said that they were going to give people a full year heads up. So I would say if school is going to start fall of 2022, they're probably going to try and have the boundary changes done around the fall of 2021. I don't want to speak for the board, and I probably overspoke already. But based on past history, they got feedback and they said we're going to do it a year ahead of time so families can adjust and plan accordingly.
And as far as kind of getting input or providing input on those, is there opportunity to do that?
Yeah, yes. Yep. Yeah, any part of school district planning, there's always the opportunity for input. So continue to exercise your right.
I have a question about Harriet Bishop. All of the different proposals, it has me wondering about the safety of the students and the families, you know, getting the kids to and from school. If you look at the map there's like one main street by the school from which you can access, and there's one crossing walk, you know, with the stoplights and everything. And I'm wondering, in all of these different proposals, have they talked about how they're going to alleviate the potential for much more unsafe environment due to addition, remodel, that piece of it? Because I looked at the material and I don't know if I've just missed it. I'm wondering how are they going to address that?
So one of the biggest safety issues that you have with most of your elementary schools is there's no control or circulation. When you look at this building, you have no idea where the buses are supposed to go relative to the parents. You have staff coming and going, and you have students trying to walk to this building. So when you look at things like this, or things like this, we're looking at ways that you would access the property and how it would be arranged so that you can separate bus and parent drop-off for ease of student traffic.
Can you go back to the Bishop one and walk us through that?
So with this one, we're showing, again, these are residential properties. Nobody's talked to them to see if they want to buy or sell. So this is just shown as a possible connection, but even just getting rid of a drive lane that comes in between the middle of two and trying to relocate it so that you control the circulation and the traffic the way it should be done. By putting the building back here, we can control the circulation inside the site and maneuver vehicles and bus traffic so that you have less conflicts. And then in a situation like this, any student walking from this region would be able to walk to the building without crossing pathways. Same from here, there would be a sidewalk up and around things. So anytime we design a school, or any other firm designs a school now, it's about looking at circulation. There's a lot more parents dropping off now than there ever was in the past. And so car and vehicle circulation, bus circulation, huge liability issues for districts, right? They want to keep the buildings separate, or the buses separate from other vehicles. So this site is a difficult site. Obviously, this is a pretty major thoroughfare, so we're not going to be able to just drop a on-road, off-road off of that. So.
All right, one more.
Going forward again, let's end on a positive note, and what are we gonna do in the future and stuff. Having come to these meetings, done your charts, all that stuff, obviously our common voter's probably not gonna do that. What are we looking to educate the rest of the community about the issues with the population, how we're at 98% capacity and all that stuff? Because I think once people look at the raw data you have, the facts and everything like that, like how do we go about doing that? Are we gonna have like commercials, or I just don't know, like how does that all work?
Are you taking this one?
Yeah. It'll be very similar to what we did in 2015. As a district employee or a board member, we can't say vote yes. Our role is to provide the facts. So we go out, talk to Rotary, Kiwanis, we get in front of anybody and everybody we can just to educate them on a lot of what we've been doing. And then We need a vote yes group who actually go out and encourage people to support this. But we'll do everything we can to educate the voter on why we're asking for what we're asking for, and sometimes we may even go with the vote yes people just to provide facts and not to say anything about voting yes, and then we let them do that part of it. But yeah, it's part of the reason, one of your questions earlier, why we do it in the fall versus April. We didn't think we'd have enough time from the decision to get out and educate the voters. So we thought next fall would give us the spring and summer to get out and educate people on why they should support this referendum.
Mike, when would you think that vote yes community committee would start working?
I would like them to start like tomorrow, but we need a couple co-chairs to take that on, and we do have some individuals that were co-chairs for our vote yes for the operating referendum in 2015 that could kind of help them get started, but they're going to be new board members, so they can't do that now. But and part of the reason we use this type of process and have citizen voice meetings and really trying to, I mean, we're starting to educate people already with this information, but we'll be on the road talking to anybody and everybody that will let us, and then we go to each staff meeting and educate our employees as well. So, and I've already started the process beginning of the year. I talked to Kiwanis and I already know what we're looking at. I got in front of the retired educators group. So even now I'm starting to get that information out so people are informed. Okay, thank you for coming, and thank you for those who are at home live streaming this. We appreciate you coming and asking questions. And like I said, in a couple of days, we'll get your questions posted on our website and with the answers that we can provide. But again, thank you. We appreciate your engagement in the process and stay engaged in the process. And if you have an opinion one way or the other on certain things, I encourage you to come to a school board meeting. There's a public comment section where you have 3 minutes, or if there's a lot of people, or 5 minutes. If there's a lot of people sign up, you may only get 3 minutes, but you get in front of the people who are actually making the final decision. So take that opportunity. And there was a lot of questions about the survey. I would encourage you the Friday before the board meeting. The board meeting is January 8th, I think. So the Friday before that document will be in board docs. It'll be live where anybody can access it. So you'll see what's going to be presented to the board. And then if you have nothing to do on that night, you can come and watch the dialogue between the board and see where they land. Or you can sit at home and watch our board meeting live stream as well. So thank you for coming. Stay engaged in the process. And if you have any questions down the road, don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll try to respond. So thank you, and have a great evening.